For my game analysis project, I chose Mortal Kombat 11. It was developed by the NetherRealm Studios, as well as published by Warner Brothers Interactive Entertainment. I chose this game because I've been playing it on and off since the very first one released in 1992. I always liked the game. I liked the fighting games in particular because you could get something out of them, a nice stimulation out of them, a nice gameplay without too much effort or having to spend 20 to 30 hours playing before you got a payoff. Mortal Kombat came out in 1992 after games such as Street Fighter and Double Dragon. It upped the level of graphics as well as introduced blood and a little bit of gore into the game and was somewhat controversial at the time, especially as Congress was debating violence in video games and trying to attribute video games to the ills of society. At the heart of the game is individual fighting. It has three basic levels, which is one would be your practice level, where you can grab a fighter, two fighters actually, but you control one, the computer controls another, or in my case, you could just use them as a dummy and practice your special moves and get to know your fighters plus their moves before you delve even deeper into the game. The second mode is the actual fighting mode, to where you can either fight with you and another player, you can fight online with multiple players, or you can fight against the computer. So you can choose your fighter, and then you can choose a fighter for the computer, and then go about into the different matches. The third mode, however, in Mortal Kombat 11, you now have a story mode, which includes long narratives, long cutscenes that are very cinematic, very detailed animations that take you from Mortal Kombat 10, where that ended, and then advances it through Mortal Kombat 11. This story mode includes 12 different scenes, and it walks you through the story of Earth Realm fighters versus the Outworld fighters. So your basic concept of good versus evil. And as you advance through the story mode, you first have no agency. You're only left with what the story gives you, what the designers allow you to have, which is you just walk through, you just allow the game to play on its own, allow the story to develop, and then every now and then basically a fight breaks out. In the case of the story portion that I played, you ended up being Casey Cage, which is the daughter of Luke Cage, and Sonya Blade from the original Mortal Kombat stories. And you would play against Liu Kang, or at least try to. And then if you won, your story would advance. If you lost, you could try again, or you could stop and go back to the beginning. Part of what I want to focus on as far as analysis goes is really the lack of agency you do have with the game. You have some agency as far as you get to choose your players. You have a couple different outfits that they can wear. You can choose who you fight against. And there's definitely a lot of different fighting modes and special abilities in which you can use, but it's really only what the designers give you. If you're in fighting mode, that's where you have the most agency. There are 37 different fighters you can choose from, even ones you can buy, such as Rambo and Terminator and the Spawn, or the old standbys that have been there forever, like Johnny Cage or Sonya and Sub-Zero, who's my favorite, Scorpion. That's where you get the most agency, is during the fighting modes. The least amount of agency is definitely during the story mode, when you have no control over almost anything. Or you pick a story to follow. You can go in order from 1, 2, 3, and 4, or and then you follow that story. But even when you do fight, you don't get to choose who you fight. So when the story mode stops and it allows you to begin fighting, you're, say, stuck with Cassie Cage, who I end up having to fight with or use as a fighter. And story mode tells you who you're going to fight. So the story mode really takes away from all agency that the game might have. Whereas the fighting mode gives you back some of that agency, even though it might be a little limited compared to other games such as Final Fantasy or Minecraft, or some of those ones that definitely have a lot more agency involved, a lot more interaction, a lot more immersion into the game. I find Mortal Kombat 11 really contains two different game types, or both game types, story and game. I would put it down in the action genre, especially for the fighting as part of the game. You don't really have to follow the story. But then there's also the story mode that allows you to go in depth into the writing, into the narrative of the Mortal Kombat world. So, and it is to note that this world, when it started in 1992, has spawned 3 different movies, 2 in the 90s and 1 recently this year in April of 2021. Most of the play elements center around the individual fighters, their abilities, and the violence associated with their quote-unquote finishing moves. Now, in the beginning games, the most violent scenes did take place during the ending or their finishing moves, when one fighter would kill the other. In Mortal Kombat 11, most of the violence will take place, or at least the showing of the violence, a lot of it times, takes place in, say, a rewind version of an attack, where a fighter might do a particular move, then the game itself will slow down and go in depth and graphic detail of that move and show the extreme violence of the move, of the fight. This is really showcases the graphics of the game. As I played through the game, I played the different modes. Most of the time I stick with the fighting mode of the game. It's fun. The graphics are beautiful, really. It's very intense graphics. Interactivity is limited to just the fighting, really. You can't move through the locations too much. It's a back and forth. You have a limited amount of space in these locations. I don't think you're able to pick up stuff unless it is part of your character's arsenal of moves. If you're able to use daggers or a rock, or throw the character themselves against boulders. Otherwise, the elements inside the scene are pretty static and are just there as background mostly. I thoroughly enjoy this game, extreme violence notwithstanding. I always enjoy the Mortal Kombat. I think they've come a long way from the very, say, 8-bit that they used to play back in the 90s to what's going on now. And I'm sure it will only get more intense, and I'm guessing in the future they'll probably develop the story more so that you might have a little more agency involved to move around in the world, so you're not necessarily being controlled by whatever the designers allow you to. So I'm looking forward to maybe in the future Mortal Kombat games to where you will be able to go on more of an adventure and use the fighting techniques versus being placed in certain areas, and that's your only avenues of fighting, your only sources of the story. So I look forward to future games. Maybe they'll tone it down a little bit as far as the blood and guts spilling over everything, but something tells me they will. Anyways, I highly recommend Mortal Kombat. If nothing else, it is a way to relieve some stress and anxiety.